on top of all of this is the real issue. Let's move on to this next part. Let's put this next on the screen, which is that there has been, some pretty dramatic accusations of war crimes by the Russian military. Yeah. Now, we're not going to show you the photos because it's very difficult, A, in order to verify that it's happening, B, in terms of who these people are and others, and there's a ton of propaganda going around. I think what can be said is this, which is that on the internet, over the last couple of days, there have been traded accusations of war crimes by the Russian forces, which has spawned a lot of calls by the media in order for more intervention. And also, the Russian Telegram channels are alight with all of these videos purporting to show Ukrainian forces also not treating Russian soldiers well. I'm going to err on the side of, frankly, believing both of them, which is not going to please a lot of people. And the reason why is war is hell. It brings out the absolute brutality and the worst in people. And sometimes strategy has nothing to do with it, and the immense anger that some, junior level forces feel in the heat of this type of conflict can actually lead to some of the worst things that happen, as we have seen throughout the history of warfare. But that obviously is a complicated story. The problem, though, is it has spawned some of the craziest calls yet that we have seen from the mainstream media for direct intervention into the conflict with Ukraine by the United States. Chief among them really has been Ali Veshi over at MSNBC. Here was his dispatch after some of the war crime photos appeared to be public. Let's take a listen.
The global world order and potentially democracy's survival hang in the balance. If this isn't the kind of moment that the United Nations and NATO and the UN and the G20 and the Council of Europe and the G7 were made for, what is the point of these alliances if not to stop this? The world cannot sit by as Vladimir Putin continues this reign of terror.
Oh my gosh, Krystal. This is the other problem, which is you can't let emotion cloud your judgment this way. When you say, if this is not what to do, then what? You're talking once again about a nuclear exchange. Also, and look, I know this sounds heartless, and I do not diminish what's happened to the Ukrainian people and to many of the civilians and others who have suffered here. But the point of an alliance is about defense. It's not actually about acting on humanitarian force in order to bring military force to bear. It's about protecting national interests. This can sound callous, but at the very core level, that is what the NATO alliance is actually about. It's not about this entire doctrine which he's espousing here, which is called R2P, the responsibility to protect. This is something that's emerged in the decadence of the 1990s. If you were to go back and talk to any statesman in history, this would be a completely foreign concept. But it has completely taken over all of the brains of the people in media here, and they almost are using emotional blackmail, which is saying, oh, are you saying that you don't care about the war crime? Of course not. It's horrible what is happening. Yeah. Does that mean that we should risk a nuclear exchange? No, I mean, that's a very simple calculus to me. I don't understand why they are discarding these outright risks. It may come from chauvinism, hubris of the West. They may just want to call Putin's bluff. Maybe they're fine with it. I really don't know the answer, but that's incredibly irresponsible to broadcast to millions of people.
Yeah, and by the way, just in case he wasn't clear enough in that clip that we just showed, on Twitter, he said something very similar. He said, the turning point for the West and NATO will come when the sun rises over Kyiv on Sunday and the war crimes against civilian non-combatants become visible to all. There is no more time for prevarication. If never again means anything, then this is the time to act. Aaron Mate replied to that and said, okay, what specifically are you advocating for? And Ali Velshi replies, direct military involvement. So he's not even trying to couch it or hide it or whatever, which, I kind of appreciate the honesty because that's what a lot of these people ultimately want, but won't actually come out and say. But no, he came right out and said, what I want is direct military involvement. And this is why I've been very leery of the overwhelming, this is going to sound terrible, but this is the reality, the overwhelming focus on just the humanitarian aspect of this, which is important, deserves coverage, deserves endless compassion, but without corresponding hard-nosed conversation about what each of these options ultimately mean. What does it What did it mean when we launched all-out economic warfare on Russia, and how was that likely ultimately to go? And we're going to get to that in a moment. It hasn't gone well. In fact, it's really backfired. It's made it less likely to create the outcomes that we ultimately like. It's sort of strengthened the hand of Putin in a lot of regards in terms of his hold on power within Russia. What does it mean if you're going to have fighter jets in Ukraine, if you're going to send fighter jets in? What does it mean if you enforce a no-fly zone? The lack of that kind of discussion of how this could escalate and what each of our choices ultimately risks, that's how you end up with people who I'm sure think of themselves as very liberal, like Ali Velshi, and potentially progressive, advocating for wars. It's the same exact playbook that we saw with regards to Afghanistan, where people who see themselves as, like really do good, bleeding heart liberals, and I don't say that in a disparaging way, being manipulated into thinking that the right, like just humanitarian thing is for us to stay in Afghanistan forever.
Yeah, okay, let's roll the tape here. What happened the last time that NATO acted out of humanitarian intervention? We know it's 2011, Libya. The French and the Germans say we want to have a humanitarian NATO mission in order to take out Gaddafi's air force to stop him from, inflicting pain on the civilian population amid the Libyan revolution. Sounds noble. Okay, so we do that. What ends up happening? Well, these rebels win the civil war, sodomize Gaddafi on live television. I have no sympathy for Gaddafi, by the way. But that's what happens. So we have a cheer. We think this is all going to work out well. Okay, what happens? Libya collapses into a massive civil war. Hundreds of thousands are dead. Many of those weapons from Gaddafi find their way into Syria. By the way, our ambassador, Christopher Stevens, gets attacked by radical Islamic terrorists on September 11th and ends up dying. Then what happens is that modern-day slave markets begin to pop up in Libya. And now it's 2022. The city of Benghazi, which at the time we were trying to protect, fell to ISIS, requiring us to bomb it to smithereens in order to take them out. And 11 years later, after all of this has happened, are the Libyan people better off for us having done that at the time? Some of them might argue yes. Maybe. I think a lot of them would say that what has resulted as all of this has been utter chaos, the destruction of wealth, the destruction of the entire Libyan middle class, and has also sparked, by the way, the refugee crisis in terms of what's happening in Europe. So you put that all together, we know what happens. I don't understand how we can't look at that story and then say, you know what, let's up the ante and do that again in Europe, except against somebody who has nuclear weapons. This is the point. You can't let just sheer emotion guide your security decisions. And when you have calls like this without airing really what the consequences are, it's dangerous. I saw over the weekend, there's a Ukrainian politician. He tweeted out some of these photos, these terrible photos of civilians who were killed. Again, my heart goes out to these people, seriously. He says, this is the Ukrainian city after being deoccupied. Dead bodies of civilians with hands tied and bullet holes in their heads from behind. This is 2022. Is it fascism or genocide? What's this? Europe, USA. How did we let this happen? Now, once again, you are presuming that it is all within our control. It is the chief, the egotism to think that you have a direct influence on the affairs of the entire world is crazy. But what's even worse is that was quote tweeted and reiterated by some of the top people in all of media. Margaret Brennan at CBS News Face the Nation, chief among them, she literally just quote tweeted it and said, Europe, USA, how did we let this happen? And a very quick perusal of her feed is just constant retweeting calls for NATO, saying that this questions the entire NATO alliance about, all of these calls for military.
Supposed to be like a straight news.
That's what I'm saying.
Journalist.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. This is why it's crazy.
To take.
And we see this in terms of her coverage as well. Look, I think Zelensky is a hero of his own people, and he's doing a great job for Ukraine. Does that mean that we have to take everything the man says entirely as fact? No, we have to fact check these things. And yet, look at how she conducts herself whenever she has him on television. Let's take a listen.
Mr. President, your team shared with us a video, images that your government has gathered of what has been left behind outside of Kyiv that I do want to share with our viewers. And I want to ask you about it.
So again, we're airing images obtained direct from the Ukrainian government. Do I think that they're wrong? No. Are they perhaps selectively edited? Should we then maybe do our due diligence? Last time I checked, there are war photographers in Ukraine. You can also use open source photos from what's happening. This is a dangerous precedent that we're setting here. You know, what we learned from Iraq, WMD, don't trust anything that governments are going to tell you straight up. You should, or find, trust, but verify at the very least. And I hate sounding as if I'm diminishing the Ukrainian cause. I think it's a just cause. What I'm pointing to instead is that how we conduct ourselves should at the very least be the chief consideration of what do we have at stake, what are the consequences of escalation, how would that impact the American people, the global economy, the lives of our everyday citizens. All of that is being pushed aside by our current mainstream media.
And I do think that Biden really gave up the game when he admitted that their real goal was removing Putin from power. Not through, I don't think that there are, many people within the administration who are pushing for like a direct war on Russia, but they are foolishly deluding themselves into thinking that they can bring enough pressure to bear internally within the country that his regime will fall. And again, we're about to tell you why that whole approach has completely backfired. When in fact, what we should be relentlessly focused on, if you do care about the lives of the Ukrainian people and about their cause, which is just, how do we create conditions for peace? How do we put pressure on both sides to create conditions for peace? And that is not a conversation that you see anywhere unfolding in our media. I mean, to the Margaret Brennan thing, listen, the Ukrainians are in a fight for their lives. They're in an absolutely existential struggle. And as part of that, they are using every single channel of resistance that is available to them. And part of that resistance is information.
Yeah.
Zelensky has been, mostly very effective in that sphere. And we've already seen some just, blatant propaganda that came from them that was just not true. There was what is he called? The ghost fighter or whatever,
Kiev,
ghost pilot.
Right,
there was the Snake Island thing. I mean, we've had these instances already which were debunked, which was propaganda came out from the Ukrainian government. And I'm not justifying it, but no one should be surprised that a nation in an existential battle for survival is going to use all of the tools at their disposal. So then for you to just effectively uncritically, yes, they put a little label on it that said Ukrainian government footage, but that's as far as they went. And you just uncritically share the propaganda reel that they've prepared for you, that is really, really something. I mean, talk about just complete lack of any sort of journalistic integrity. It's extraordinary. And clearly, Margaret Brennan has become very activist on this issue. And this is another thing that really frustrates me with the mainstream press. I don't mind journalists having a worldview and having a lens and having an opinion. But what I despise is people holding themselves out as neutral arbiters and then actually being some of the most ideological actors that exist in American politics.
Yeah, they need to just admit the truth. She's like, look, this is really tugged on my heartstrings. This is a very difficult story for me to tell on the other side. But at the same time, I don't even really accept that because I think that whenever you hold that position, look, there are all kinds of things I believe. And we have people on here all the time who I disagree with. And that's fine. That's the whole point, which is that it's not about me. It's about everybody up here. I'll tell you what I think. Everybody knows that. But that doesn't mean that it should be the only thing that people can hear. And unfortunately, that just is the complete disposition right now of our media. And look, the conditions have probably never been better than right now for peace. The Ukrainians have actually fought this tremendously well. Now we see a Russian withdrawal, strategic, whatever you want to call it, to the Donbas region. Let's get in these conference rooms and let's hammer something out so we can end this war and there can be no more war crimes so that people don't die. Let's not use it as an excuse in order to launch World War III in which things could hop off and really kill hundreds of millions of people in such a short period of time.
How are you going to offer to roll back sanctions on Russia now? Now when you've said you want regime change and he's a war criminal and he's a butcher and when you're playing videos like this. We didn't put it in the show, but Hillary Clinton was out there on the Sunday shows too saying the same thing. We can never welcome Russia back into the community of nations as long as Putin is in power effectively. So what are you coming to the negotiating table with then if your stance is like, nah, sanctions forever actually? That's not creating conditions for peace. That is creating increasing escalation at the risk and using basically Ukrainian lives as cannon fodder.
Yeah, my alternative thesis is we never let Hillary back in the community of media.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that was forced. I'm sorry.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.